Okay, so we all know how it is, right?
Yeah.
We want to like really get into something, but time is always a factor. And that's what we're doing here today. We are taking a deep dive into the surprisingly complex world of learning to sing. And we have this really insightful book as our main resource.
It really is. This isn't just for those of you out there dreaming of singing on stage. You
Yeah.
can think of this as a wider exploration of how we all learn skills, how we grow artistically, and how we deal with those inevitable challenges that come with, striving for mastery in anything. We're tapping into all sorts of perspectives, personal experiences, observations from vocal coaching, even how music culture has changed over time, and some really interesting links to things like sports and even political thought.
Yeah, I love that. Our mission today is to like unpack the core principles and some of the maybe surprising truths about developing your voice, evolving as an artist and overcoming those roadblocks that can be so frustrating. We've got personal stories, insights into coaching methods, and a look at how music culture itself has shifted. There are definitely some aha moments in here that go way beyond just hitting the right notes.
And I think for you, the listener, it's important to understand the scope of this discussion. We're not just talking about scales and breathing techniques.
Yeah.
We're looking at the power of your mindset, the influence of cultural trends, even breaking down the whole idea of natural talent. It's a really multifaceted exploration with valuable takeaways for anyone striving for excellence in anything, really.
Yeah, totally. Okay, let's dive right in. So, how has learning to sing even changed over time? It's not all opera and formal training anymore, is it?
It's amazing. When you think about it, the evolution of vocal training has been pretty dramatic. The book we're looking at really highlights this tension between those traditional classical approaches and the more contemporary methods we hear today. There's this constant discussion between the traditional teachers and this new wave of vocal coaches.
Yeah, so you've got like the old guard with their established techniques and then this newer approach that's kind of shaking things up.
Hmm.
The book makes a point of saying the concerns from some of those traditional teachers are valid.
Absolutely. They're coming from a place of rich history and tradition, which can offer a structured path and clear guidelines on things like ideal vocal tone and what's technically sound. This tradition really fosters a strong sense of continuity and community. But the book also suggests that some of these classical boundaries can feel kind of arbitrary from a modern perspective, almost like, well, that's just how it's always been done.
It's like the rules themselves became the limitation in a way, right? The book talks about how those strict guidelines sometimes didn't allow singers to really express their individuality, and that combined with other factors led to this desire to break away and try new things.
Exactly. And, if we zoom out and look at the bigger picture, the 20th century was a period of massive change in music. The invention of recording technology amplification and more accessible high-quality instruments completely revolutionized things. Suddenly, sounds that were previously impractical to use because you couldn't hear them without amplification became viable.
This is where it gets really interesting for you, the listener. Think about it. Before microphones, you had to really project your voice just to be heard over a whole orchestra. Technology completely changed that. Even a subtle whisper can now reach everyone in the audience.
And the availability of cheaper electric instruments made it way easier for people to get into making music. More people learning to play instruments led to this explosion of new bands, and with that, a huge demand for singers. These new instruments also created a whole different sonic landscape. Traditional boundaries were broken down, and singers could explore sounds and techniques that were never really possible before.
So this new beginning, as the book calls it, allowed for all these sounds that would have been considered incorrect or even just noise to be embraced. And that really came to a head in the 50s with the rise of rock and roll.
Exactly. The book argues that rock and roll was in many ways a consequence of this meeting of technology and this urge in younger generations to rebel against tradition and what was already established. Part technological progress and part rebellion against a musical tradition that had become a bit inflexible.
But the book doesn't just celebrate this shift without acknowledging any downsides. It points out that like any big change, there were things that maybe got lost or overlooked.
That's true. But the overall perspective is that this shakeup forced the established music world to re-examine and critique itself. The book even touches on the challenges classical music faces today in attracting younger audiences, which maybe you've noticed too. It makes you wonder if, like anything else, cultural phenomena have a life cycle and maybe eventually fade from prominence.
So it seems like we're in this ongoing process where voice coaches are figuring out what's valuable from those older methods and what needs to be adapted for this new world of music. I guess the ideal approach is finding a way to integrate the best of both.
That's the key takeaway. And the conversation is still evolving, but generally the trend is towards incorporating the useful elements from both traditional and modern approaches. Now, for those of you thinking about starting this journey, let's shift our focus a bit to what happens when you actually decide to learn to sing. It's not just practicing scales and exercises right.
Yeah, let's break that down. The book really emphasizes that learning to sing isn't just about mastering technique. It's about fundamental personal change, too. You have to examine your own deeply held beliefs and attitudes.
And something really interesting to consider is that many adults aren't starting from scratch. They come with years of baggage, mental and emotional stuff that can actually get in the way of making progress vocally.
Yeah, it's like all that stuff we accumulate can block our voices from doing what they're capable of. The book uses a really cool analogy of learning to skateboard to illustrate just how frustrating it can be to learn new motor skills.
Exactly. Imagine yourself trying to learn a new trick on a skateboard. You're going to fail repeatedly and often for quite a while. Then something clicks and you almost land it. That almost stage can last a while too, but you start to get those near misses more frequently. You finally land it once, which is exciting, but then you might regress back to those near misses before you gradually build consistency. The book stresses that failure isn't just a possibility, it's essential to learning any new skill.
And it's not just physical skills. The book draws a parallel to your own shift in political views and how being open to different perspectives can actually be really beneficial. You mentioned how that wider perspective had a positive impact on your singing.
That's a crucial point. By being willing to critically examine and maybe even discard long-held beliefs, whether it's about politics or singing, you develop a much broader lens through which to see the world and approach new challenges. This openness leads to better decision-making and a deeper understanding in anything you do.
But the book also cautions against thinking you have all the answers, which is something for all of us to be mindful of. It can be difficult to separate true insight from just feeling superior in a discussion, Ryzen.
Yeah, this raises a really interesting question about intellectual humility. The book touches on how sometimes people with lack knowledge tend to overestimate their own competence, which can make productive learning and discussion really difficult. It stresses the importance of practical experience and acknowledging that others might have a more complete understanding.
And for some singers, it's not just about opinions. There's this very real physical and emotional block. The book describes it as this vocal prison of panic and feeling out of control.
What's fascinating is how even relatively minor vocal difficulties can trigger this fight or flight response in some people. And the more their voice tightens up because of anxiety, the more anxious they become, creating this negative feedback loop.
So ultimately, the book argues that having an open mind, being receptive to different ideas and ways of doing things is absolutely fundamental to breaking down those mental barriers and making informed decisions about your vocal development.
Right.
It's about challenging your own assumptions and paradigms.
Precisely. It's about fostering a mindset that embraces exploration and learning from diverse viewpoints. Now, for those of you thinking about performing, let's talk about those early experiences. You get up on stage, but it doesn't always go as smoothly as you might hope, does it?
Let's unpack that. The book really captures that emotional roller coaster of those early performances. The pre-show jitters the moments of self-doubt during the set, and then the intense post-show analysis. Oh, I remember those feelings so well. You practice, and technically you feel good, but then you get off stage and it's like, why didn't that feel, magical?
The book highlights this really frustrating reality that you can have a high level of technical skill. Let's say you're 90% proficient at a high standard. But if there's just one critical element missing, or if you're getting in your own way, somehow all that solid technique might not translate into a powerful performance. It can be surprisingly unforgiving.
It's like this one tiny flaw overshadows all the hard work.
Yeah.
And that leads us to the 1 millimeter rule, which I thought was such a great analogy. They use golf as an example, which I think we can all relate to.
Exactly. In golf, if the angle of the club face is off by just 1 millimeter when you hit the ball, that tiny difference gets amplified over the distance the ball travels, potentially sending it off course. The book argues that singing is kind of similar. Small technical errors, if they become habits, can have a huge negative impact on your sound and your ability to really connect with the audience.
And the book points out that singers who are really successful often intuitively follow these very simple but crucial rules. It results in a sound that feels clean and, importantly, vulnerable. They mention Taylor Swift and Justin Bieber as examples of artists who, despite their different styles, get these fundamentals right.
Right. It's not always about flashy vocal tricks. It's about mastering those core elements that allow your true voice to come through without tension or obstruction. And the book warns against a common trap, especially for those who are more intellectual: overthinking.
Oh yeah, that one hit home for me. I bet it does for you too. You can get so caught up in the how and the why that you forget to just feel the music. It's like people try to intellectualize their way to great singing instead of patiently developing the skills over time.
Exactly. There's a real emphasis on a more gradual approach and allowing yourself to feel your way to mastery rather than overanalyzing every little thing. It's a valuable perspective.
And that desire for quick fixes can be so tempting, but can really backfire, can't it? Trying to sound good right away instead of focusing on actually getting good.
That's such an important distinction. The book cautions against that tendency to prioritize instant gratification over real long-term development. Those shortcuts might feel good temporarily, but they ultimately hold you back from true vocal improvement. It's about embracing the journey of becoming skilled, trusting that the sound will come as your technique develops.
So it's all about finding that balance, isn't it? Having a vision but not getting stuck in analysis, accepting that you'll make mistakes, but not consistently delivering bad performances, being self-critical, but not letting that crush your motivation. It feels like a constant balancing act.
That's a perfect way to put it. Every quality you have, whether it's your analytical mind or your emotional intensity, can be an asset or an obstacle. The key is learning how to channel those things in the right direction at the right time. Now let's go back to that 1 millimeter rule because it applies to more than just the technical stuff.
Yeah, let's unpack that again. The book brings up the 1 millimeter rule, again, talking about making those subtle adjustments that lead to the right solutions, and importantly, build your confidence over time.
What's interesting here is the focus on cultivating the sense of calmness, relaxation, and openness to being vulnerable and making mistakes, approaching your vocal development patiently, and being willing to experiment without beating yourself up.
And for some, getting good at singing might not just be about learning new things. It could be about getting back to the starting line, as the book puts it. Unlearning years of habits and approaches that weren't serving you well vocally or maybe even personally.
That's a really powerful point. The book challenges this romantic notion of natural singers. It suggests that while some people might start with a pretty clean slate, others have developed ingrained negative patterns or beliefs about singing, and they face a much bigger challenge of unlearning and rebuilding healthy habits.
So self-awareness, really knowing where you're at vocally and what's causing your struggles, becomes that crucial first step in overcoming challenges.
Absolutely. The path to improvement is a combination of inner work, that mental and emotional self-improvement, and consistent, dedicated practice over time. The book even suggests a practical guideline. For every hour you spend thinking about your singing or looking for information, you should dedicate at least 3 hours to actually practicing. Finding that balance between thinking and doing.
And it's not all about technical skill, is it? You can be technically proficient, but still struggle to connect emotionally with an audience. The book emphasizes that mastering certain principles beyond just hitting the notes is essential for that authentic connection.
That's right. It touches on the limitations of coaches, who themselves learn to sing very easily and naturally. They might not fully understand the deeper struggles of singers who really have to work at it, something to keep in mind when choosing a coach.
Which brings us to this important piece of advice. If you're not making progress with your current vocal coach, the book suggests it might actually be the coach, not you. It recommends looking for coaches who have themselves overcome significant vocal difficulties.
Yeah, those coaches often have this unique perspective because they've been through it themselves. They truly understand and can offer practical advice based on their own journey. The book even shares your story of perseverance against the odds as a powerful example of what's possible.
My journey definitely wasn't a walk in the park. Now let's talk about something I think affects a lot of people pursuing any passion, the influence of cultural expectations and what the book calls groupthink.
This is something to be really aware of. The book explains how our culture often sets these unspoken timelines for success in different fields. And that can be incredibly discouraging for people who start learning something new, like singing later in life. It's like there's pressure to have achieved a certain level by a certain age.
Yeah, it's as if there's this rule that if you haven't shown significant talent by your early 20s, you're already behind. But the book makes the point that if you start later, you just have some catching up to do. It compares it to learning to walk. Everyone goes through their own process of stumbles and falls and eventually getting it.
But culturally, as the book points out, adults are often judged much more harshly for those stumbles than kids are. There's less tolerance for mistakes when you're older. And this ties into the idea of defensiveness towards anything that challenges our deeply held beliefs or big investments we've made.
Well, absolutely. The more time and energy you've put into a certain way of thinking or doing things,
Yeah.
the harder it can be to accept that there might be a different and even better way.
Yeah.
The book shares your experience of realizing that some of your fundamental beliefs were wrong and how difficult but necessary it was to question those beliefs.
That willingness to reevaluate your core beliefs is so important for growth. And the book stresses the importance of being discerning about advice you get. Whose opinion should you really value and trust? They use the example of tennis. You'd obviously take Roger Federer's advice on technique more seriously than someone who rarely plays. It's the same with any field of expertise, including singing.
So it's about developing that critical thinking and being selective about what information you let influence you, not just accepting everything at face value. Because as the book points out, a lot of people giving advice, especially about unconventional things like learning to sing as an adult, are just making guesses based on their values and their own risk assessment, not necessarily actual experience.
You have to learn to evaluate opinions based on the actual experience of the person giving the advice. Ask yourself, how do they actually know what they're talking about in this context? Often there's not a lot of real practical experience behind the advice.
And ultimately, the book suggests that true certainty about a path comes from fully committing and doing it. Very few people truly go for it when things are difficult.
It's about taking that leap of faith and committing fully. The book shares your drive to prove that you could achieve big things regardless of your starting point as long as you put in the effort.
Yeah, I was really determined to see how far I could go no matter how late I started. And the book makes an interesting comparison between that all-in mentality and the potential downsides of having a backup plan, suggesting that complete commitment is often more effective for achieving ambitious goals.
Because when you're all in, there's no easy way out. You become a pioneer learning directly from experience. And the book ends with this powerful thought. The true permission to pursue your passion must come from within you.
You can't wait for external validation or someone else to give you the green light. You have to make that decision for yourself. Let's talk about the internal world of a singer now. The book explores this idea of understanding confidence and this state of flow.
It explains that a healthy ego has both the confidence to try new things and the self-awareness to acknowledge your weaknesses. It's not about being arrogant, but it's not about beating yourself up either.
And progress in anything like singing isn't always a straight line upwards, is it? The book describes it as a cyclical process with periods of improvement and then plateaus or even setbacks. A few steps forward and then maybe a stumble back.
Exactly. And it talks about why adults might find learning new motor skills like singing harder than kids. It often comes down to muscle memory, ingrained, inefficient patterns that we've developed over years, maybe without good role models. You have to consciously override those until the new, more efficient ones become dominant through practice.
So building confidence as a singer is this interplay between technical mastery and mindset, managing anxiety both when you practice and even more so when you perform. The book introduces these two types of confidence, value-based confidence and skill-based confidence.
And it's important to understand the difference. Value-based confidence comes from your commitment, your values, and your ability to keep going even when things are tough, regardless of short-term wins or losses. Skill-based confidence is about your actual abilities and trusting your technique.
The book says that value-based confidence is super important for beginners and intermediates, especially when you might not have a lot of skill to rely on yet. It's about that inner belief that you're the kind of person who will stick with it.
Exactly. And the real magic happens when you combine that strong sense of value-based confidence with growing skill-based confidence. But the book also highlights value-based confidence as this safety net. Even when your skills might feel shaky, your values and commitment are always there.
And then there's flow, that feeling of being in the zone where everything clicks. The book defines it as that state where your technique is solid and your mind is free from fear and self-doubt.
That's a perfect description. In a state of flow, you're totally present, not attached to specific outcomes, just trusting your skills. The book lists those qualities of being in flow, being in the moment, having a non-attached attitude, feeling uninhibited, and contrasts those with being out of flow, distracted, focused on results, self-conscious.
And these two states, they tend to reinforce themselves, don't they? Positive audience response can really boost that flow state, and being in flow often leads to a better performance and a good reaction from the audience.
Definitely. The book even talks about the challenges of being too aware of your skill level, especially when you're building confidence. That awareness can make things feel daunting or highlight what you perceive as your shortcomings.
But the key is to rely on that value-based confidence as your foundation until your skills catch up. And the book offers some short-term strategies for managing those times when you're out of flow during a performance. Focus on what's working, over-rehearse your material, avoid overthinking, stay in control, and take responsibility.
Those are all really valuable tools, but the book also asks this tough but important question. If you're constantly struggling to get into that flow state, are you really in that small percentage of people who will push through those challenges? It's a reminder that this journey isn't always easy or fun.
It's about not letting that lack of flow get you down and derail your progress. It's a normal part of learning. Now let's talk about something a lot of performers struggle with: anxiety.
It's important to understand that your mind doesn't really distinguish between real and imagined threats. So the anxiety you feel before or during a performance can be just as debilitating as if you were facing actual danger. And it can really mess with your ability to sing your best.
And the book stresses that managing anxiety isn't a quick fix. It's a process of addressing deep-seated habits and beliefs that you might have developed way back in childhood. It's about self-reflection and developing beliefs that allow for failure and comfort under pressure.
It's about building a new, more supportive foundation of beliefs. The book provides a helpful list of changes to embrace. Welcoming failure, separating your self-worth from your singing, focusing on the process, being kind to yourself, being patient, learning from mistakes, and having fun.
And for those immediate moments of stage fright, the book offers some practical strategies. Thoroughly prepare your material. Have a warm-up routine, focus on what you can control.
Yeah.
Mentally prepare for unexpected things. Take deep breaths, stand tall, use the 5-second rule to regain composure, allow yourself to make mistakes, and reflect on your performance afterwards with a balanced perspective.
These are all practical tools for both preventing and dealing with anxiety in those moments. It's about feeling in control and keeping things in perspective. Now let's talk about some external pressures that can affect a singer's journey: negative judgment and groupthink.
I think this is something a lot of adult learners, especially those starting without much experience, struggle with. There's often a lack of encouragement and sometimes even discouragement from people around them.
The book highlights this contrast between the positive reinforcement often given to young singers who seem talented and the lack of support that older learners often face. That early positive feedback can create this amazing cycle of confidence and motivation.
But for adults, that lack of support can easily lead to the opposite, a downward spiral of self-doubt. They use the example of a 35-year-old trying to learn to sing and facing all these practical and social expectations that aren't really conducive to the learning process.
Right. Adults have responsibilities, jobs, finances, families, which can limit time and energy for learning something new and demanding. And instead of support, they might face pressure to focus on more sensible things. The book says to never underestimate the power of that social pressure.
So how do you navigate that? The book shares your strategies for dealing with groupthink, making career choices that give you more flexibility, minimizing expenses, being selective about social events, and developing mental resilience. It's almost like strategically optimizing your life to support your goals.
It's about making choices that align with your vision. The book stresses the importance of creating your own positive reinforcement, especially when external validation is scarce. It includes that quote from Pablo Sarasate, the violinist, about the years of unseen practice behind what people see as genius.
A good reminder that mastery often takes a lot of time and effort and often going against the grain. Now let's get into this fascinating idea from the book, Debunking Talent.
This is such an insightful concept. The book proposes that what we think of as talent is largely an illusion created over time by all these little choices, experiences, and consistent effort. They use this analogy of walking down a road with countless forks.
Each little decision, each experience steers you down a slightly different path. And over years, those tiny changes add up, shaping us into unique individuals. We don't see those gradual changes, so we tend to see people as finished products, attributing their abilities to some inherent quality.
That's why we fall into the talent trap. The book gives these contrasting examples. Gemma, whose interest in singing was nurtured and encouraged, versus David, who was discouraged. Their paths led to very different outcomes, not because of any difference in natural ability, but because of their environments and social factors.
So for those who feel like they're on the hard side of learning, the book suggests you need to disconnect from those negative influences and forge your own path, driven by your own motivation. And this leads to the iceberg theory of performance.
What the audience sees, the final performance, is just the tip of the iceberg. Beneath the surface is this massive amount of experience, choices, practice preparation values, and dedication.
It's all that unseen, consistent effort that builds the iceberg, leading to that perception of talent. There's a quote from Michelangelo about the hard work behind mastery.
A good reminder that dedication and effort are the real driving forces behind success, even if people don't see it. Now, after all that talk about the mental game, let's get into the practical stuff. Learning and mastering vocal technique.
All right, so you're ready for the concrete stuff. Where do you even begin? The book recommends starting by simply singing songs you enjoy for 3 to 6 months. This lets you explore your voice and figure out your limitations and challenges.
It lets you organically discover where you struggle. From there, the book suggests getting a structured voice training program. A good program breaks down complex skills into smaller steps, letting you progress gradually, like learning a language or a physical skill.
You even talk about your own practice routine. Following a vocal program, analyzing live performances on YouTube for technique incorporating vocal exercises into your daily routine, and practicing guitar in a way that supports your songwriting and vocals. Consistency seems key.
Absolutely. The most important thing is to develop a consistent practice routine that works for you, your schedule, and your goals. The book introduces the secret 3 rules of spells to maximize your practice. Consistent volume, consistent vocal quality, and consistent vowel sound on each note. These rules force you to use correct technique.
They make you really pay attention to the basics, right? Consistent airflow is another fundamental thing.
Absolutely. Consistent airflow not only powers your voice, but also helps with anxiety and supports those tougher exercises. The book emphasizes overcoming that tendency to hold back your breath, especially when you're nervous or going for higher notes.
And keeping your vowel sounds consistent is crucial for properly stretching your vocal cords without using those outer neck muscles. The book talks about vowel drifting, which is often overlooked.
It's amazing how often singers unconsciously change their vowels as they sing higher. This can mess with your vocal cord closure and lead to tension and interference from those neck muscles. The book recommends recording yourself doing vowel exercises to check for this, using Naya as an example.
And then there's the importance of separating the movement of your articulators, your tongue, mouth, and jaw from your larynx. This is essential for clear articulation. The book suggests exercises like singing e-a-ah and oo-ah to develop this.
These exercises help you gain control over your articulation while keeping your vocal cords coordinated. If your tongue, mouth, or jaw are moving incorrectly, it can affect your vowels and engage unnecessary muscles, hindering your vocal freedom.
It sounds like a big part of mastering technique, especially for adults who have developed habits over years, is unlearning those inefficient muscle patterns. The book compares it to a tug-of-war between old reflexes and new coordinations.
That's a great analogy. It takes mental strength and perseverance to replace old habits with new ones. And while those old habits might try to creep back in during pressure situations like performances, consistent practice weakens them and strengthens the new muscle memory. The book stresses the role of a good coach in helping you identify and feel those correct physical sensations.
Which brings us to finding good mentors and coaches. The book says you need 2 types of mentors.
You need those successful singers who embody what you want to be. They provide the vision. But you also need coaches who have overcome vocal struggles themselves because they offer practical guidance and understanding.
Because those naturally gifted singers might not get the struggles of those who have to really work at it. The book emphasizes that coaches who have been through vocal difficulties have a unique ability to connect with and guide singers. It even recommends specific coaches.
A good coach has a deep understanding of both technique and the mental and emotional side of singing. They've dealt with those challenges themselves, and they can create those aha moments for you. And it's important to have a good rapport and communication with your coach. Find someone whose views resonate with you, whose explanations make sense, and who can actually help you fix your specific issues.
How often should you be taking lessons? The book says it's a balance between guidance from a coach and self-study and practice. The ideal frequency depends on your personality, your finances, and your skill level.
Beginners need more frequent guidance to build a foundation, while advanced students might need less. The key is finding that rhythm that balances instruction with enough time for you to practice and integrate what you've learned. The book suggests different schedules, like frequent lessons at the beginning, then more solo practice, or blocks of lessons with longer breaks depending on your learning style.
So it comes down to having a system, a plan. The book emphasizes systematized learning for progress.
Absolutely. It highlights 5 things that contribute to vocal improvement. Consistently using a singing program, watching others perform, performing yourself frequently, and practicing regularly. It specifically recommends singing success and talks about the benefits of long-term use, even mentioning they have sales sometimes. Combining these 5 things gives you perspective vision and helps you break down the learning process.
What about when you hit that point where progress seems impossible? The book calls this hitting the wall.
That's when you're putting in the effort, but not seeing much improvement. The book encourages you to push through initially to develop problem-solving skills and self-reliance, but it also says to get help if you're stuck for a long time. Hitting plateaus is normal. A coach can offer a new perspective and identify things you might be missing. It's about balancing finding answers within yourself and knowing when to ask for help.
And for a lot of adult singers starting out, the first hurdle is abandoning the outer muscles, consciously releasing that tension in their neck, shoulders, and jaw.
That initial stage of releasing tension and dismantling bad habits is often necessary. It's about clearing the way and building a solid foundation. This unlearning might feel like going backwards, but it's essential to correct past mistakes and make real progress. The book briefly mentions the later stages of developing consistency across different environments.
It's important to remember that becoming a musician isn't just about technical skill. The book stresses balancing technique with artistic expression.
Right. Great music needs both a solid foundation and the ability to convey emotion and connect with an audience. The book compares pure emotion without control to a screaming baby and contrasts that with a technically perfect but emotionless guitarist. True artistry is about finding that balance of expression within a framework of understanding and control. Technique frees you from worrying about the mechanics so you can focus on the art, but a lack of technique can lead to problems and limit your expression. It's about that blend of structure and freedom.
And connecting with an audience requires being open and vulnerable, even though you risk being judged.
That's so important. Performers have to push past their defenses and be emotionally transparent to truly connect. The book acknowledges that criticism is inevitable and presents the choice between trying to be liked by everyone, which is impossible, and accepting that you'll be liked by some and not by others. It uses Adele as an example of a successful artist who still gets criticism. Accepting some level of criticism is part of being liked by those who appreciate your authentic self.
And the book encourages performers to shift their mindset to be a feeder, not a leech, focusing on giving to others through their art.
It suggests that a measure of your value is what you create and contribute to the world. It describes a great performance not as self-indulgence, but as creating energy and emotion that you give to the audience, fulfilling their need for connection and escape. It reminds you that your job is to feed your audience with your emotions, your artistry, and your unique perspective. Don't get too caught up in your own struggles on stage. Focus on giving the audience what they came for.
And understanding audience response is interesting. The book says to keep things in perspective and learn to distinguish between supportive feedback from loved ones and genuine feedback from those who are moved by your performance.
Audiences focus on the overall impact, not the process of your improvement. Don't get too hung up on one bad show. It doesn't define you. The book also points out that as you improve, the feedback you get might shift from mostly support to more genuine reactions from those who are touched by your art. Don't get too attached to post-show feedback. It's just a snapshot of one person's experience in one moment.
This leads to an interesting idea. Pay other people before yourself, meaning, as a musician, focus on giving value to your audience before expecting to get paid a lot.
The book addresses the common complaint from musicians about not getting paid enough, but it challenges that by saying you should focus on providing a truly great experience before expecting big money. Ask yourself, is what I'm offering really unique and high quality? The difference between good and great is huge. It mentions artists like Tom Waits, Bob Dylan, Madonna, Lady Gaga as those who provide value beyond just vocal skill. Ask yourself, am I selling a rare, high-quality product? If you consistently deliver something exceptional, the money will follow.
Let's touch on this tricky topic. Talent and individual differences in singing. The book has a nuanced view on this.
It acknowledges that some aspects of singing are God-given. People have different physical limits. But it argues that in contemporary music, talent in the traditional sense is becoming less important because boundaries are more fluid and individual expression is valued. Focus on mastering your own unique strengths. Then it talks about racial and gender differences in singing, framing it as observations and hypotheses, not facts. The aim is to understand and learn from those differences.
That's an important way to approach it. What are some of the observations about gender differences?
The book observes that men seem to struggle more with outer muscle tension and performance fear, while women, due to their thinner vocal cords, might be more prone to damage if they don't use good technique. Possible reasons for this are differences in vocal cord structure, societal expectations around emotional expression, and the male drive for success may be leading to tension. For female singers, a potential challenge might be a reluctance to push their boundaries and develop that more aggressive side of their voice, perhaps due to hormones or societal expectations of femininity. The book also mentions gendered sounds and how masculine and feminine vocal qualities can complement each other.
And what about racial differences?
The book suggests that Black singers might often have more vocal freedom and less tension, possibly due to genetics, maybe more agility in their laryngeal muscles and the influence of more open and